Hello and welcome to this news live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi and Defence Minister Parvez Khattak have tested positive for coronavirus as the country battles a third wave of infections. Meanwhile, the country's most populous province of Punjab announced lockdowns in several districts, having a positivity rate of over 12%. The restrictions will take effect on the 1st of April and will last for 11 days. Globally, there are over 127 million infections and nearly 2.8 million deaths. Amnesty International has called on France to scrap or amend a controversial separatism bill. In a statement, the rights group said the new law will lead to further discrimination against the country's Muslim minority. The call comes a day before a Senate vote on the bill, which activists say breaches religious freedom. The US has suspended a trade pact with Myanmar until the return of democracy there. In a statement, the Treasury Department voiced concern over the crackdown on peaceful protests against the February 1st coup. Nearly 450 people have been killed since then. Traffic in the Suez Canal resumes after the giant container ship blocking the waterway refloats completely. The vessel remained wedged across the canal for almost a week after turning sideways due to strong winds. The closure costed the global trade $9 billion each day. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi and Defence Minister Parvez Khattak have tested positive for coronavirus as the country battles a third wave of infections. Meanwhile, the country's most populous province of Punjab announced lockdowns in several districts, having a positivity rate of over 12%. The restrictions will take effect on the 1st of April and will last for 11 days. The decision was made after the second largest city of Lahore reported over 23% positivity rate, the highest in the country. Pakistan has so far recorded 14,256 deaths and nearly 660,000 infections since the first case was reported in February last year. A vaccination drive is currently underway to immunize people above 50 years of age. The global number of coronavirus infections has topped 127 million, with over 2.78 million deaths. In Mexico, authorities say the death toll is much higher than previously reported, putting its tally at 321,000. More in this report.
Disregard for precautions, the politicization of the pandemic, vaccine nationalism, and the continuous spawning of new variants has led the world into yet another wave of COVID-19. The UN has once again warned that the world faces intense problems of debt sustainability due to the crisis. Meanwhile, the US has suggested it will not take punitive action against China for its handling of the COVID-19 outbreak. In an interview, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, Washington called for mitigating a future pandemic. Moreover, the variant first detected in Brazil is now threatening to send shockwaves across the globe. And the sanctions hit and cash-strapped Venezuela has proposed to pay for vaccines with oil.
Petróleo por vacuna.
Dedicate oil for vaccines. Venezuela has the oil vessels and has the customers who will buy our oil. And they would dedicate a part of its production to guarantee all the vaccines Venezuelans need. Oil for vaccines. We are ready and prepared for oil for vaccines, but we will not beg anyone. Venezuela does not kneel before anyone in this world. We have dignity and we have the resources.
In Europe, the Czech Republic has identified a new strain of the virus. But authorities say this mutation is not more dangerous than the British or South African variants. In France, the number of COVID-19 patients in intensive care units has risen to a new high for this year. Elsewhere, Sweden says it won't be able to hit its target of inoculating all adults by 30th June due to delays in vaccine supplies. Meanwhile, Australia has announced a snap 3 lockdown in the northern city of Brisbane to stamp out an outbreak of the UK variant.
But what this means for Greater Brisbane is that we will have to go into a 3-day lockdown. This is the UK strain. It is highly infectious. Now, we need to do this now to avoid a longer lockdown, and that lockdown will commence at 5 p.m. this afternoon.
India has once again reported its highest single-day increase in COVID-19 cases since October, taking the tally to more than 12 million. The country has recorded 68,020 cases and 291 fatalities in the last 24 hours.
The US has suspended a trade pact with Myanmar until the return of democracy in the country. In a statement, the Treasury Department voiced concern over the crackdown on peaceful protests against the February 1st coup. The decision comes after the Myanmar military killed over 140 protesters over the weekend. Nearly 450 people have been killed by the military so far. US President Joe Biden condemned the situation as terrible and outrageous. The European Union has also threatened more sanctions on the perpetrators of violence in Myanmar. The bloc's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, said the EU is making efforts to initiate a political process in the country. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Islamabad and Ankara are heading towards an ever closer strategic relationship. He was speaking to his Turkish counterpart on the sidelines of the 9th Ministerial Conference of the Heart of Asia Istanbul process being held in Dushanbe. During the meeting, Qureshi highlighted Pakistan's positive role in the Afghan peace process and its support for the country's development within the regional framework. He also appreciated Turkey's continuous support for the Kashmir cause. At the conference, representatives from around 50 countries and organizations will discuss building a consensus around the peace process in Afghanistan. The conference is part of Istanbul Process, a regional initiative on security and cooperation for peaceful Afghanistan. The initiative was launched in 2011 in Turkey and comes ahead of a key meeting on the Afghan peace process in Istanbul next month. India has refused to issue a passport to former Chief Minister of occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Mehbooba Mufti, citing security concerns. In a tweet, Mufti said New Delhi's action shows that a former Chief Minister holding a passport is a threat to India's sovereignty. Umar Abdullah, former Chief Minister of the Valley, also slammed the decision. Mufti is among hundreds of Kashmiri leaders placed under detention across occupied Kashmir since August 2019. Amnesty International has called on France to scrap or amend a controversial separatism bill. In a statement, the rights group said the new law will lead to further discrimination against the country's Muslim minority. It added that the proposed law will be a serious attack on rights and freedoms in France. The call comes a day before a Senate vote on the bill, which activists say breaches religious freedom. The government says the bill will tackle what President Emmanuel Macron has termed Islamist separatism, but critics argue it unfairly targets France's Muslim minority, which at 5.7 million is the largest in Europe. The Israeli president is set to begin consultations with political parties next week on their preferred candidate to form a government. The presidential spokesman says Reuven Rivlin will assign the coalition-building task to one of the candidates by 7th of April. Whoever Rivlin nominates will have up to 42 days to try to form an administration before he assigns the task to someone else. If that proves unsuccessful, Israel would head into a fifth election. A final tally from the March 23rd election showed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud and allies in control of 52 seats in the parliament. However, his political fate depends on the two wildcard parties, the far-right Yamina and an Arab faction led by Mansour Abbas. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have agreed to strengthen bilateral ties. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman held a telephone conversation with Qatar's Amir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. They discussed environmental issues, including the development of clean energy. They also exchanged views on Saudi Arabia's initiatives to address environmental challenges in the Middle East. This was the second contact between the two leaders since Qatar signed a reconciliation agreement with Riyadh and 3 other Arab nations in January. Traffic in the Suez Canal resumes after the giant container ship blocking the waterway refloats completely. The vessel remained wedged across the canal for almost a week after turning sideways due to strong winds. A live tracker showed the vessel being straightened after tugging and excavation operations over the weekend. At least 369 vessels are waiting to transit the canal, including dozens of container ships, bulk carriers and oil tankers. About 15% of the world shipping traffic transits the Suez Canal, which is an important source of foreign currency revenue for Egypt. The closure has costed the global trade $9 billion each day. North Korea has accused the UN Security Council of double standards when it comes to its treatment towards Washington and Pyongyang. North Korea's foreign ministry official Jo Chol-soo said the UN Sanction Committee's meeting against Pyongyang negates its right to self-defense. Jo added that the UN resolutions are direct products of the US hostile policy. He said many other countries across the globe are fighting all kinds of projectiles and warned that a double standard by the Security Council will only cause an aggravation on the Korean peninsula. Dozens of people have been killed in a militant attack on the northern Mozambique town of Palma. A spokesperson for the security forces say hundreds of locals and foreigners have been rescued. Militants launched the assault on Wednesday just as French oil company Total announced to resume work on a $60 billion gas project nearby. The attackers have also besieged a hotel in the town with many foreigners inside. Security officials say 7 people were killed while attempting to escape the hostage situation. At least 2,600 people have been killed, while nearly 700,000 displaced in a 3-year armed campaign in the region. In the United States, the trial of white cop Derek Chauvin, accused of killing George Floyd in May last year, is due to begin later today. Chauvin was one of the 4 officers involved to stand trial in the case. He is facing the most serious charges of the 4, including second-degree murder, which carries a sentence of up to 40 years in prison. Chauvin, who was fired from the police, has pleaded not guilty. Ahead of the trial, family and friends of Floyd held a vigil and prayer service in Minneapolis. In May last year, Chauvin was caught on camera kneeling on the neck of Floyd for over 9 minutes, resulting in his death. The incident sparked protests in the US and across the world against police brutality and racism. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has removed Abdul Hafiz Sheikh as Finance Minister. Speaking to local media, Information Minister Shibli Faraj says Hamad Azhar has been given additional charge of the Finance Ministry. He added that Azhar will follow the Prime Minister's vision to ensure relief for poor people. This comes weeks after Sheikh was defeated by Yusuf Raza Gilani in the March 3rd Senate elections. In 2019, Sheikh was made advisor on finance after Finance Minister Asad Umar tendered his resignation. He was appointed as the Minister for Finance in December last year for 6 months. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has reiterated Pakistan's support for the kingdom's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He was speaking to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over the phone. According to Prime Minister's office, Khan also reaffirmed Pakistan's country's desire to strengthen ties with Saudi Arabia. He said the two leaders agreed to work together to bolster bilateral ties in all affairs. The Prime Minister also accepted an invitation by the Crown Prince to visit the kingdom in the near future. In a tweet, Khan also appreciated the Green Saudi Arabia's initiative. In Lebanon, Parliamentary Speaker Nabi Berri has warned that Lebanon will sink like the Titanic if it cannot form a government. Speaking at the opening of a session of the Parliament, he said there will be no exceptions and everyone will sink if the deadlock continues. Earlier, hundreds of people demonstrated in Beirut against deteriorating economic and living conditions. Lebanon's problems have compounded after an explosion at the Beirut port last year. The economic fallout comes amid a continued failure to form a government since the resignation of Prime Minister Hassan Diab. Former Premier Saad Hariri was designated to form a new government, but he remains at odds with President Michel Aoun. Slovak Prime Minister Igor Matovic says he will step down and swap roles with Finance Minister Edvard Higa. Matovic decided to leave office over the controversy surrounding a secret deal to buy 2 million jabs of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine. His decision to step down has been welcomed by coalition parties as well as his opposition from the SAS party. At a press conference, Matovic said he had decided to drop all previous conditions for his resignation. Slovakia has received 200,000 doses of the Sputnik vaccines, but their administration is pending testing. It would be the second EU country after Hungary to vaccinate with a product not approved by the EU drug regulator, the EMA. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has reshuffled his cabinet amid growing public pressure and plummeting approval ratings. 2 Australian ministers have been demoted following dual rape scandals that shook national politics. Morrison replaced Minister of Defence Linda Reynolds with Peter Dutton, previously Minister of Home Affairs. Michaelia Cash has replaced Christian Porter as Attorney General and Minister for Industrial Relations. Meanwhile, many women took to the streets to call for gender equality and an end to sexual violence. Recent polls show the allegations also significantly dented Morrison's approval ratings. At least 480 migrants have been intercepted off Libya by the Coast Guard in the past 48 hours. The International Organization for Migration said they were attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea to go to Europe. The IOM says they are among the 4,500 people brought back to Libya this year. Photos posted on Twitter show workers giving medical aid, blankets to migrants after they arrived on shore. The agency also voiced its objection over the treatment of the migrants inside the war-torn country, saying Libya is not a safe port. A massive fire has broken out at one of Indonesia's largest oil refineries. At least 5 people were injured in the blaze in the West Java province. The fire caused a large explosion, damaging nearby houses. Authorities say the fire forced nearly 1,000 residents living nearby to evacuate. State oil company Pertamina says firefighters are at the scene while the cause of the blaze is still unknown. Officials said some people are also reported missing. In France, thousands took to the streets of Paris demanding politicians to do more in the fight against climate change. French lawmakers will start examining a bill on climate change on Monday, but critics say the bill is not ambitious enough to limit the country's carbon emissions and meet the requirements set in the Paris Accord. The bill, called Climate and Resilience, aims to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. The draft law is the result of the work of 150 French citizens, which made propositions to fight global warming. Hundreds of Cubans took to Havana's famous seaside to demand the U.S. lift its 60-year-old embargo on the Caribbean island nation. The caravan was part of a weekend of small protests in more than 50 cities around the world. Riding on colorful cars, motorcycles and bicycles, the Cubans were fluttering flags, yelling "Down with the blockade." Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez was also present at a demonstration site. Talking to the media, Rodriguez slammed Washington's opportunistic tightening of the blockade in the midst of the pandemic. Previous U.S. administration took more than 200 initiatives to tighten the decades-old trade embargo on Cuba. Venezuelans are fleeing to Colombia to escape clashes between the military and irregular armed groups. This report has more.
Clashes between armed groups and the military have caused chaos in Venezuela. According to a Colombian official, as many as 4,000 have fled the country. Displaced Venezuelans say soldiers have resorted to killing civilians, among the other abuses.
You are invaded by sadness when you realize that you cannot be at peace at your own home. It fills me with nostalgia and pain. It's not easy to get home, the one that you build with a lot of effort, and find it in a disaster.
Venezuelan authorities say they are investigating accusations that members of its military committed abuses, including detaining and killing civilians.
Resulta imperativo recordar.
It is imperative to remind the international community that the before-mentioned groups have the sponsorship of the Colombian government and the Central Intelligence Agency, which is why their incursions into the Venezuelan geographic space should be considered as an aggression sponsored by Ivan Duque, since he provides logistical and financial support, creating a criminal corridor on the border with the advice of the Southern Command of the United States of America.
Meanwhile, Colombian President Ivan Duque has accused Nicolas Maduro's government of sheltering FARC dissidents, but the accusations were denied by Caracas.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Now the business updates. Wall Street main indices have opened lower as global banks face potential losses from a hedge fund's default on margin calls. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index opened over 0.25% lower, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite fell nearly 1% at open. The S&P 500 index also fell nearly 0.5%. Meanwhile, oil prices declined over fears of long disruption at the Suez Canal in Egypt. In football World Cup qualifiers, England have maintained their winning start with a comfortable 2-0 victory over Albania in Tirana. Harry Kane opened the scoring in the 38th minute, which was doubled by Mason Mount in the second half. In other fixtures, Dani Olmo scored in injury time to help Spain beat a resilient Georgia by 2-1, while Denmark thrashed Moldova 8-0 in a one-sided contest. Earlier, France beat Kazakhstan 2-0 to secure their first win of the campaign. Didier Deschamps' side will next face Bosnia-Herzegovina on Wednesday. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.